Welcome to Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono, the esteemed former Congresswoman known for her insightful perspectives and vast experience. Prepare to be engaged in thought-provoking conversations with influential personalities, exploring a wide range of topics, from social issues, politics, and policy, to personal development, shedding light on important issues that impact our society. Now, here's Mary.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Sagely Speaking. Imagine leaving a very successful career, dropping everything, and then devoting your time and your passion to an issue much larger than yourself, and yet an issue that's also brought you great pain. Joining us today is Angela Kennecke, a seasoned investigative journalist who is working on a story on drug overdoses on the very day she got the news that her 21-year-old daughter died of an overdose. Angela left the broadcast TV career behind and started a nonprofit called Emily's Hope. We welcome Angela to Sagely Speaking, and I know that this conversation is going to be a good one. So Angela, welcome, and how are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm good, and it's so nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you. Thank you for having me on your podcast a year or two ago. You're still going strong with yours. You're sort of my role model in the podcasting world. So it's great to have you here. And I know that there's a lot that's happened since we spoke last, but can you tell us a little bit about your story, how you started? And, you know, we're both fellow moms who've sort of been through this in one degree or another.
Yeah, I always call it like the struggle, really, really difficult times. And ultimately, in my daughter's case, tragically ending in death, which you never think is going to happen to you or to your family. But the trouble, I always say, with Emily, and she was my oldest child out of four. I have 3 biological children and 1 stepson, and she's my oldest and just a brilliant child and very artistic, very talented, very beautiful, really had everything going for her. I used to always tell her when she was growing up, with so many gifts comes great responsibility to the world, you know, with what you choose to do with your gifts. And never could I have imagined that addiction would really side rail her and put our whole family into such chaos. And the issue started when she was about 14 to 15 years old in high school, when she began experimenting with marijuana and met a boy who was dealing marijuana and was actually with that guy up until 3 weeks before her death at 21 years old. And so there were a lot of battles in my home. There was a lot of mistakes that I made as a parent, just trying to figure out how to navigate this horrible thing that was going on where the rebellion was incredible with my daughter, and then trying to stop the substance use and trying to direct her and trying to get help. It was just such a hard road to navigate. And I ran into a lot of dead ends. So many things didn't work. Ran into a lot of stigma, invoked the law even while she was a juvenile, thinking that, you know, that could help. And ultimately didn't even know to what extent the substances that she was using, and found out upon her death that she had been using heroin, and the heroin that she used was laced with fentanyl. So I had thought up to that point that it was marijuana and Xanax, and had tried many, like I said, different things. We were 3 days away from holding an intervention. She wasn't living in my home any longer because I had too many rules, and I would, you know, find things, or I would crack down, or I would, you know, do all these things that she didn't like. And so found out following her death that she had, somewhere in that year before her death, graduated to heroin, which, as you know, is very addictive and a tough substance. And at the time, in 2018, we were just starting to really hear about fentanyl. You know, you mentioned that I was working on a story on overdoses on the day she died, and I was working on a story on Good Samaritan laws and overdoses, and I interviewed a mother whose daughter had died of a heroin overdose, and no one had called for help because they were so concerned about getting into trouble, not thinking my daughter was going to overdose. I thought, well, we know she's using, I think I know what it is, I'm not totally sure, but we're going to get her help. We're going to get her into treatment. And that never happened. So here I am, almost 6 years later.
You know, you are such a wealth of knowledge, and unfortunately it's painful knowledge, but you have seen both sides of this. I work with parents who either are dealing with a child who's struggling or are dealing with the grief of a loss. And you've been through the journey on both. And you've brought up a couple topics that just hit me, obviously, resonated with me. One is, what do you do? There's no manual for parents. I mean, I think people have tried, or hopefully they're coming out. And of course, we're attempting to, but it's not like another disease. It's not like you take your child to the doctor and they get insulin for diabetes or whatever treatment might be. This is so completely different. And parents don't realize that a lot of what has to happen is the opposite of what you would do for another disease, right? And it's very complicated. And I think we, as a parent, we question our own sanity. And then there's the other side of the parental guilt. And I think that, what did I do wrong? Why didn't I stop this?
Right. I think as parents, right, we think we're omnipotent, right? We are all powerful and we can somehow control our children. And I think we all learn as parents that that's not the case. I always say when I'm talking to newly grieving moms, we actually have a support group at Emily's Hope for, it's all mothers. I mean, anyone is invited who's lost someone to overdose or fentanyl poisoning, but it happens to all be mothers who join us. And there's a lot of guilt involved. And I always say there's no room for guilt in any of this because you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. And I certainly did that. And I did things that were really hard for me to do. I didn't want to do that I thought I was doing in my daughter's best interest. And they may not have been. They may not have been, the best way to handle this disease of the brain. And it's so unpredictable. But I did what people told me to do. I did what I thought I needed to do. And then the other thing is you go back as a parent and you think, well, if only I would have done this, if only this would have happened. In fact, I was having one of those thoughts just last night about something that happened when Emily was very young and this started. And I tell other parents that one thing that really helped me through those, or helps me continue to this day through those thoughts, are even if I would have done this thing, this still could have happened anyway. You still could have lost them anyway. And now with fentanyl and the drug supply, oh my God, it's just such a dangerous time. Kids who are experimenting for the first or second time are dying. So you don't have to suffer from substance use disorder, but it's just a really frightening time. Really it is.
It's a very frightening time. And, by the way, I follow you on social media, and you're so good at it. Thank you for all that you do. And I've seen how beautiful your daughter was and her great artwork. I'm a struggling painter, so I have a special appreciation for her work that she's left behind. So, I think that, again, you do what you think you have to do. And even with a pro counseling you along the way, there's no guarantee. And I think the myth that parents have that I think we need to dispel a lot is that, well, my child is suffering from an addiction, so I'm going to drop them off for 30 days and they'll come out and they'll be fixed. And
Right.
Don't we wish that were the truth?
Right. I think about that a lot because actually Emily had not been to inpatient treatment and we were planning on putting her in inpatient treatment when we didn't get that chance because she died. And I think a lot about how in my mind, I idealize it, right? I think, if we could have just got her into that inpatient treatment, everything would be okay. But, after working in this field for so many years now, I've come to realize that just simply isn't true. Relapse is part of it. And sadly today, relapse can and often is deadly. So, there are no guarantees and it takes so long for the brain to heal from these substances. But I have to say, for me in the time period that I was dealing with this with her, I ran into so much bad advice, and there were counselors out there who didn't help, in fact, who made things worse. And I just thought, invoking the law will scare her. Well, I realized you can't scare someone out of substance use disorder, but I didn't know that at the time. And so those are maybe some of the regrets I have because it was so harsh. It was such a harsh process, and it was hard on me. The only thing I can say is that after going through doing the tough love stuff and really setting extreme boundaries sometimes, I also later on took a course on oppositional defiant teenagers because I just thought really that's what I was dealing with. And the substances, I didn't realize what a strong role they played in all of this. But I learned that the penalties couldn't be, that harsh. And then later, after she was an adult and she went to college on an art scholarship, but ended up dropping out. And of course it was because of substance use, but I just thought I thought it was the boy, or I thought it was this or that, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on. But I learned to approach her from a standpoint of love. I thought about what would I want if this were me? What would be effective in talking to me? And I realized that the anger, there was no place for anger, even though sometimes I would feel, anger is fear, right? And I was really afraid and also hurt and just at wit's end. But when I approached her from a standpoint of love, I kept her in my life. She didn't disappear for a week or two at a time or however long. She was still around, and she would still want something to do with her family when she was able. So that was probably the biggest advice I can give parents is, anger doesn't work, scaring them doesn't work, that if you can approach it from a standpoint of love, and you do have to have some boundaries, obviously, but there aren't easy answers.
I couldn't agree with you more. There's a lesson, too, that we learn along the way about detaching with love, and that you have to come from a place of love, and it is hard because it's a very irrational disease, that things don't always add up, and the lies and all of the things that come with it are very unique to this disease, for sure. But you have a support group for parents who've lost a child. What else is Emily's Hope doing?
Oh, we're doing so much right now. I think in some ways we're coming to a tipping point. Before I really get into that, though, I wanted to tell you that detachment part. I was really working on that before she died, which I find kind of ironic. I was, reading books and saying prayers and working on detachment. And I think in some ways that's helped me cope with her death as well. So yes, you're right. Detachment is, you cannot control another human being. But in terms of Emily's Hope, yeah, we started a support group, but we do a lot more than that. We have a podcast, Grieving Out Loud, which we don't get any funds for. It's just part of our service of the charity. And we talk about addiction. We talk about loss to a stigmatized death like overdose or fentanyl poisoning. We talk about coping with grief and all of these things. That's why it's called Grieving Out Loud. I started it within a year after my daughter died. And that's what I felt like I was doing, just talking about this nonstop publicly, where so many people had refused to talk about it publicly at that period of time. And then we have education curriculum, and we're really excited about that. Our substance use prevention education curriculum is now in 4 states, before 6,000 students, and we're getting to kids at a young age. K through 5 is what we launched with, and we're actually working on the development of 6 through 12 because there are other programs out there for middle and high school, but there's really virtually nothing, just a few programs out there for the elementary school level. And I really believe prevention is the key for this disease and for these choices that kids make, try something that could be laced with fentanyl. So we're doing that, and we just have so many things that we're doing. I know I'm forgetting something. Oh, we have a new post-overdose response team where we're responding to people who survive overdose. So we have that going on, and just many, many things that we're doing.
I do see on social media you've got great support from locals and throughout your state, for sure. You're from South Dakota, and we've met somehow, even though we're in different states. But you've got great support from folks. I see businesses here and there just coming out to help you with all of your efforts, which is great to see.
It is. I think I had one advantage, and I'll be the first to admit that, is that I was a public figure in this state for more than 30 years, which is a long time to be on television. So a lot of people know me, and I think when they heard my story, they were surprised it could happen to someone in the public eye like that. I think they were surprised it could happen in a family like mine. I think people had preconceived notions and, wrongly preconceived notions. But, and so I think that it got a lot of attention that way. I think I had that advantage where many people do not. But I do always encourage other parents, and I've talked at a lot of DEA family summits throughout the Midwest. I've talked to other parents about, just creating a child and a legacy in your child's name, and what can you do in your corner of the world, or what can you do to make a difference. Even I feel that my biggest calling now is to prevent other parents from going through what I've gone through, what my family has gone through, and I just don't want that pain inflicted on anybody, which is why I do what I do.
Well, before we go to a quick break, I just want to say, applaud you that as a public figure that you smashed the stigma. You said, I'm going to talk about this publicly. I'm going to go out, wear my heart on my sleeve, and tell you what has happened when oftentimes people don't want to talk about it. This is sort of a bygone thing, hopefully, that people would sweep it under the rug, be embarrassed about it, not understand the disease of addiction. And I just want to say you're such a rock star in coming out and saying, this happened to me and it can happen to you.
Well, thank you. I could get into a little bit more about some of the backlash and stuff that goes along with that, but yeah, thank you.
Well, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, let's talk about that backlash. Okay, we'll be right back in 1 minute. Hi, I'm Mary Bono, and I want to share something important with you. My friend Angela Kennecke, an award-winning journalist, has a podcast that speaks directly to the heart. It's called Grieving Out Loud. Angela started this after the loss of her daughter Emily to fentanyl poisoning. This podcast isn't just about coping with grief, it's a deep dive into the realities of the fentanyl crisis, addiction, and the journey to recovery. Angela brings together bereaved parents and experts in addiction, mental health, and grief to offer understanding and hope. I've been there and I can tell you, it's a conversation we all need to hear. Find Grieving Out Loud wherever you get your podcasts. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Zomad, whose technology has paved ways for mass activation of trusted messengers by brands, nonprofits, and public sector clients. We believe that this is the future of media buys, behavioral change, brand lift, and purchasing generated by hyper-targeted reach, combined with architected frequency of audiences viewing different content from multiple creators. For more information, go to zomad.com. That's XOMAD.com. And we're back, Angela. Backlash. Oh my goodness. That happens from stigma. Yeah. Public figure that you are, you're out there. What happened?
So I had developed over the years a pretty thick skin. So I got into television before social media. And I used to get the occasional letter, from someone who hated my hair or hated a story that I did, or something like that, right? Especially as a woman, you get commented on about your appearance all the time. And not that those comments didn't bother me. I always say there's a 3-day shelf life for those comments. They kind of stir in your mind for about 3 days and then they go away. But I had developed a pretty thick skin at this point, especially because I was doing investigative reporting, which seemed to make everybody mad, right? So when I went to uncover something, people didn't want uncovered, or I would do stories that, politicians didn't like, I made everybody mad. And I got to the point, really, I think after Emily died, where I actually did not care, because I felt like the worst thing in the world had happened to me. There's nothing that you can do or say to me that is worse than the pain I experienced at losing a child. So I really don't care. And you're entitled to your opinions, and I'm going to do what I think is right. So when I did come forward, I just knew I had to. There was something in me that just felt I had to speak about this. And I actually have a colleague who this very same thing happened to that chose not to go public. So it is a choice. I mean, you don't have to do this just because you're in the public eye. And when I did speak about it, I have to say overwhelming majority support. It is just, unfortunately, negative things stick in our minds as human beings so much more than the positive, right? You can have, for every negative comment, I think you need 5 or 10 positive ones, to outweigh that. But so I did have people, call my daughter a junkie, say I was a terrible parent, say that she deserved to die, all of those things. And I just had to say, well, that's very unfortunate that person is so mean and also lacks complete understanding of, and doesn't have any insight or know really what went on in my home, in my life with my daughter. So I got used to, I think those comments are less frequent. And I actually think, sometimes I think we are at a tipping point where so many parents have talked now after this kind of thing has happened to them and other people have spoken out about it. We're at a tipping point now where I think the rest of the nation realizes, just as what happened in the AIDS crisis, I mean, you remember that, right? Like people were writing fake obituaries, and I always say it took a bunch of angry moms like storming on the Capitol, right? I shouldn't use that term, storming, but, marching on the Capitol and the AIDS quilts and all of those things to really start to change the tide. And as we know, a lot of money was put into research. It's no longer a death sentence. There are treatments for HIV now that are very effective. And but it took a whole movement, right? And I think the same is said about these drug deaths, is that it's taking an entire movement and enough people affected by them.
To talk about HIV for a brief second, I was very proud to carry the reauthorization of the Ryan White Act. And and a lot had changed from the first iteration of the bill, a lot of stigma, and to the second time as a Republican to carry that legislation and for it to be heralded by both sides was pretty great to see. But that's an interesting analogy. But there have been just as many parents, and moms trying to raise awareness in the Congress. I will tell you this, and you know this because we've talked about this before, that early on I was a lone wolf talking about this along with Hal Rogers from Kentucky. And we were basically fighting against big money, big interests, big pharma, and so it was very difficult because there was a lot of corporate money opposing us. Every time we would say something, that talking points would come out against us and tell us we were wrong. And one of my colleagues later apologized and said he just thought I was a hysterical mom. We need a lot more hysterical moms in Congress who are sane, but people who, if they think that that they're going to raise the issue on the importance of this topic, then more power to them. But you mentioned life sometimes just flips us upside down. It's happened to me, where one day, 1 minute, your life is one thing, and then the next minute you're down flat on your face. You've been flipped upside down, and how do you pick yourself up? And in your case, I can't imagine what strength did you have to walk away from your very successful career to start this, to say, no, I'm going to go. This is my calling. I'm going to save other parents this pain or do everything I can. Where did you find the strength to walk away?
Well, it was sort of a long process, but first I do want to applaud you for sticking to your guns, and not many politicians will do that, as you know. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being an early pioneer of this, this whole opioid epidemic and everything. We all know now, right? So we all know now about Purdue. We all know what was happening, and we all know what was done to try to squelch and stop people for speaking out. But thank you for doing that, and for going against probably where the money was, I would guess. Yeah.
Thank you, Angela.
But with me choosing to step away from broadcasting, and I had done it for a long time, so more than 3 decades, as I mentioned, and I had really felt like I'd done everything that I wanted to do in that field, and I was juggling. I had started the charity right away in February. My daughter had died in May, and I started it in February, and so I was juggling both, and then I could see the need for the charity and the work that we're doing growing and growing. And I was spending 70 hours a week working, and I just knew I was a little burned out with TV news too. I don't know if you know about the deadlines and TV news; they're relentless, and I was feeling a little bit of burnout. I had done it for a long time, and it was I just felt it was time, and I sort of went out on a limb, maybe a leap of faith. I don't know. I didn't know if it would work out or not, and I told myself, well, I can always get another job if I have to go get another job, but I really need to try to put all my efforts into this. And actually, Emily's Hope, I've been out of broadcasting for not quite a year and a half, just a little over a year. And like I said, in the meantime, I was building up the charity during that time, but we have more than doubled in size. So we're doing more work than ever before, and it's needed. And I think we're really starting to see, I live in a rural state, but we're starting to see the effects of fentanyl. I think we often feel we're insulated from, those things. They start on the coasts and they make their way to the flyover states, but we are not immune. And I think we're really starting to see that. And people are starting to realize that as well.
Nobody's immune. Right. And look, the bad guys and the cartels are deliberately finding those pockets of the country. Stories now that they're moving on to, reservations and setting up shop there because there's so little law enforcement. I mean, this is big business. Tom Wolfe was on my podcast a while ago talking about this isn't the dealer of 20 years ago. This isn't the street level guy who needs to deal to support his own habit. This is institutionalized crime. This is international narco trafficking with seriously bad guys, and nobody is immune. No community is immune. And I think that's unbelievable to think that there might be some safe place from this. And unfortunately, it's America's problem now, but coming soon to, a town near you, it could happen. But, I look at you again and I admire you, and you know that. But a working mom, I mean, that has its own, we should start a support group just for being a working mom and all that comes with that. And my hat's off to working dads, and I'm not trying to disparage that. But as a working mom, there are certain things that happen and certain levels of guilt and balancing it all, and can you have it all sort of mentality and leaning in and all this kind of stuff. And, I've done a lot of talks about that very issue, but then throw in, a disease like addiction on top of a working mom and realize this is a huge burden to bear. And for me, professional help was the way I coped. I've luckily found somebody who did know what they were doing, who was, part-time therapist at it was the then Betty Ford Center before it became a part of Hazelden. But that person was hugely important to me as a working mom. When I got into Congress, and I used to blame myself for everything that went wrong. If I only weren't doing this job, if I only weren't working, everything would be perfect. Do you feel that way as a working mom?
Oh, yeah. And then I think there were some things out at the time when my kids were little about how, we should all stay home. And there was a big backlash against working moms. And I was actually a single parent for 6 years without somebody really co-parenting with me. So that was its own challenge. I'm since remarried and have a very supportive spouse, but who also was very supportive when we were dealing with Emily during those high school years and beyond. But it was super challenging. Sometimes I look back at those years and I'm like, how did I didn't have a choice. I mean, I had to provide for my children. I had to provide health insurance for my children. I didn't have a choice. So, it was a tough time. And I had a lot of help from a really, really good counselor who also helped me following Emily's death as well. So, I think that's really important for people to seek help when they need it. And we are expected in this society. I'm sorry, I love dads, but they are not as expected to do as much as what we do as moms. And they are not as blamed as much for when things don't go right.
That's right. And you talked about the backlash earlier, and I've had a few of those comments lobbed my way too, just because of the mom and being, oh yeah. And but the role of a supportive spouse is incredibly important. And too often I do see families who disagree on the pathway forward. And again, I encourage people, if that's the case, to seek help and come together on how to parent somebody, an addicted loved one. It's critically important to come together with a plan. And as you know, part of this involves self-care. How do I take care of myself and my relationships while we're going through this? And so I applaud your spouse for that. And by the way, this has nothing to do with anything, but when I first ran for Congress, my mother-in-law came out against me. She said I should stay home and raise the kids. And to your point, I didn't really have that luxury, or I don't know if I did or not. It's history now, but I kind of laughed that my own mother-in-law campaigned against me, and I actually think that drove the vote for me. It was like I got the whole anti-mother-in-law vote coming out to support me. But in any event, the challenges that women face, because no father would have been said, you have to stay home and raise the kids. And
and I heard about it. I was working nights, and I heard about it, when I was working that night shift, right? Like, who's with your children? Fortunately, we have a really a good college right here in town, and I had some girls, coming into my home. I couldn't have survived without them, and some would last for a year or two. That was really important at the time. And I had no family. My family sort of scattered all across the country, so no family to help me here. And yeah, I wouldn't want to repeat. I mean, I miss those years when my kids were little, obviously, but I look back and I think I must have had a lot more energy back then. I was younger, so maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I can't, it feels like such a betrayal when someone like your mother-in-law, I'm sure, who had more old-fashioned ideas, right? It was probably just more about the generation that she was raised in. But yeah, I can't imagine.
Oh, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
I guess.
But again, when I look at you, I see so much strength and beauty, dare I say. And when Sonny died and I ran for Congress, my role model was my grandmother, who was widowed with 5 small children during the Depression. And she had to, pick herself up and raise the kids and work and do all of that had to happen. And women do it all of the time. Mm-hmm. And I just applaud you so much for your work and what you're doing. You're really a beacon of hope, I think, for people who are dealing with the fentanyl crisis and opioid overdose crisis. You really are a beacon of hope.
Thank you so much. I I actually called it Emily's Hope because I wanted people to know that there is hope, even though my daughter had died. And so it seems like all hope is lost, right? But I feel like her death was so senseless, it didn't need to happen. But I could do something. I could do something to try to make sure it didn't happen to other people, therefore making sense of a senseless death. And I also named her after Emily Dickinson, and Hope is a Thing with Feathers is my favorite poem, and also hers as well. So I thought that was really appropriate. And I tell people all the time, like, I have had parents contact me and say, okay, my kid is in and out of treatment, in and out of prison, and it would just be better off if they were dead. And, you don't know how. I've actually had parents say this to me. And I am just like, you have no idea what you're talking about. I am so glad that you don't know, because as long as they are alive, there still is hope for recovery. And I think there's hope in every human being. And I just don't think we give up on people so quickly in this society, right? We just toss people aside as if they were trash. And I just think that has to stop. And that is one of the main missions of Emily's Hope, is to try to change that sort of stigmatization and that attitude and turn it around.
Well, I chair Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse. We, like you, believe in prevention, especially with fentanyl out there on the scene, for sure. But before we wrap, I just want to, say that this is a calling for you. It's been a calling for me. I don't know why, except for when you talk about parents wishing that their child would, I don't want to, would die, is a horrible thought. But it does talk about the pain parents live in when they're dealing with somebody. I have a friend who's former police officer, and his son is on the streets, homeless, and he's addicted to heroin. And, everybody's dreading that call, the call that you got. Everybody's dreading that every day, every phone call. So it's a different kind of pain, but we're all in this together. And I think our calling together is, how many future deaths, or since Emily passed, how many have we lost?
Yeah, I know. This is what's frustrating, right? Because I think I'm doing all this work. Why is it still happening? And it's going in the wrong direction. That's frustrating.
It's frustrating, but we're in it together. And a lot of good parents like us. And I think that together we can make a difference. So can you share, before I lose you here, can you share your website information, anything else you want to talk about, how people can find you, follow your work, find you on social media?
Sure. Well, it's Angela Kennecke on social media. If you search that, you'll find it. But emily'shope.charity is the URL for our website. And then our podcast is Grieving Out Loud on all the podcast platforms. So I also write a blog. So if people are going through grief, I've tried to document every step of the way in the last almost 6 years. So I hope that other parents who've been through something know that they're not alone, that the grief and what they're feeling, we're sort of united in this grief. And so that's one of the reasons I do that as well.
Well, I encourage parents to read your blog, because it sort of is a de facto manual. And first of all, you're not in this alone, and other people are going through it. So again, I just think the world of you, and thank you for what you're doing. And we'll continue to talk about you and follow you, and be here for you too, any way, shape, or form I can be. But I want to thank everybody for listening to us today, and for meeting the great Angela Kennecke. I want to thank you for joining us on Sagely Speaking, Angela. Again, so thank you very much to our listeners. I'm Mary Bono, and I welcome your feedback at hello@sagelyspeaking.com. I look forward to getting together again very soon with more Sagely Speaking. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today on Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono. Remember, wisdom is a journey, not a destination. For more insights, visit our website at sagelyspeaking.com.